Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar, Who or What is a Lay Ecclesial Minister? An Introduction to Lay Ecclesial Ministry in the Church. My name is Jonathan Sitko, Assistant Director of Programs for the Catholic Apostolate Center, and I'll be your host this afternoon as we welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Harry Dudley, Assistant Director for Certification of Ecclesial Ministry for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops in the Secretariat of Catholic Education. Dr. Harry J. Dudley has been Assistant Director for Certification of Ecclesial Ministry for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops in the Secretariat for Catholic Education since January 2012, the year the Bishops' Conference established that office. In addition, he is staff to the Bishops' Committee on Catholic Education and its Subcommittee on Certification for Ecclesial Ministry and Service. Before coming to the conference, Dr. Dudley served as a diocesan catechetical leader and wrote religious education curriculum for 3 dioceses. 2 of these curricula for Archdioceses of Indianapolis and Washington have been adopted for use around the country by other dioceses. Dr. Dudley has a BA in philosophy with a minor in social sciences from SUNY at Stony Brook, New York, and a systematic theology degree from Catholic University of America, and a D.Min with a focus on religious education from the Graduate Theological Foundation in Indiana. His doctoral project focused on the spiritual life of children and consequences for those who form them. He and his wife, Patricia, have 3 young adult children, Martin, Neil, and Kathleen. His son, Martin, and wife, Crystal, presented them with 3 grandchildren, Austin, Ashlyn, and Dylan. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Harry Dudley for your today's presentation.
Great. Good afternoon. It's good to be with you today. I was encouraged when I realized that the evangelization prayer intention for Pope Francis this November is the collaboration of priest and laity. It is my hope that you will come to realize that this collaboration is essential to the meaning and purpose of Lay Ecclesial Ministry. Let me move forward here. Well, here's what we'll do today. In my part, 1, we'll look to see if you may actually know some Lay Ecclesial Ministers, as we look at some of the more typical roles of those who are Lay Ecclesial Ministers. In part 2, I hope we'll learn a little about what Co-workers in the Vineyard of the Lord has said. It's a key document that defines it in our country. And in part 3, we'll look at some recent history to see just how this idea developed over time. All right. Getting used to this here. All right, somehow, here we go. So, who is the Lay Ecclesial Minister? Well, first of all, if you've been a participant in religious education, either as an adult or child, perhaps you've encountered the parish catechetical leader. If not, you were taught by a catechist who lead the learning sessions, but they're not considered Lay Ecclesial Ministers. Catechetical leaders, that is, those who recruit, train, and support and lead catechists, are Lay Ecclesial Ministers. Did you go to World Youth Day? Hopefully some of you did. I wish I had that opportunity this year. If so, you probably went to your parish with your parish youth minister, or if you were in campus ministry, with your campus minister. Many volunteers and others helped with that event, and they led aspects of the journey, but they're not necessarily considered Lay Ecclesial Ministers. It's youth ministers, those who organize programs for youth and young adults, who recruit and train and supervise the team members and volunteers, that are considered Lay Ecclesial Ministers. Many are responsible for confirmation programs, since most are confirmed as teens. Have you sung in a choir or been a cantor at Mass? I've had that privilege. Perhaps you were recruited by the parish director of music ministry. Many volunteer choir members and cantors help with the music at Masses and other celebrations. They are not considered Lay Ecclesial Ministers, but it's the director of music ministry who recruits, trains, and leads them, as well as helps to plan the liturgy, who is one. Have you ever been in the hospital, or perhaps someone in your family was? You probably encountered a lay member of the pastoral staff or the hospital chaplain. Many volunteers also help at hospitals, bringing communion to the sick, initially meeting patients and their families to see what assistance one wants. However, the member of the pastoral staff or chaplain who recruits them and leads them, as well as works as a member of the team caring for patients, is the one that's considered a lay ecclesial minister. So all these roles and more are filled, but you notice a pattern here? One essential quality that helps determine who a lay ecclesial minister is leadership. Pius XII once said that lay apostles, as he had called them, will therefore always form an elite, not because they stand apart from others, but quite the contrary, because they are capable of attracting and influencing others. Pardon that. So one question we might think of for this part one is, now that we know some of the roles that lay ecclesial ministers fill in the church, perhaps you may even remember the names of some of them. But what are other aspects that help us determine what a lay ecclesial minister is? Let's see. For this section, one thing we might think about is, can we even use the term ministry for something that laity do? It's the document of the bishops called Co-workers in the Vineyard of the Lord that is the resource guide for the development of lay ecclesial ministry in our country. And it has helped to clarify what we mean when we use the term lay ecclesial minister. First of all, it calls them lay because their role is founded on the sacraments of initiation, baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist, rather than on the sacrament of holy orders, which grounds the ministry of the clergy, such as priests or deacons or our bishops. Co-workers calls the ministers ecclesial because their leadership role is approved and supervised by church authority, usually a pastor, and because their work actually aims at the building up of the church and the strengthening of its members in their call. And finally, co-workers calls the work that they do ministry because it's a participation in the threefold ministry of Christ as priest, prophet, and as king. So to answer our question, can we use the term ministry for something that laity do? It looks like, at least from co-workers in the vineyard, we can say a definite yes. Okay. But how did this idea develop? And that's really going to be the majority of what we share today. Some key changes in the language of how church documents speak about lay involvement may help us. And so we're going to look at them. It helps to look at a little of the history before the Vatican Council, during the Vatican Council itself, and following the Council. So we'll see what examples we can find. As an example of pre-Vatican II changing attitude, we have Pope Pius XI. He took a strong interest in fostering the participation of lay people throughout the Catholic Church, especially in what was called the Catholic Action Movement. In 1928, in an encyclical on Catholic action, he wrote, "It has no other purpose than the participation of the laity in the apostolate of the hierarchy." Later in his pontificate, though, he was focused on speaking against Hitler and Mussolini and defending the Catholic Church from intrusions into Catholic life and education. So in 1937, he wrote that laity are responsible in part for the very work, Church's work of salvation. After him, popes slowly began to talk about the need for the growth of the lay apostolate and its importance in helping respond to the crisis in the modern world, such as the development of communism and fascism, to name just a few. It's during the Second Vatican Council that the stage is set for further development, begun by Pope John XXIII on October 11th in 1962, and closed under Pope Paul VI on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception in 1965. This council did a lot to look at the role of the laity and the church in the modern world. At the beginning of the council, Pope John XXIII prayed for a new Pentecost in the church. Little did he or others fully realize what was about to happen. A question for this section might be, where does the term lay apostolate fit into this story? Isn't lay apostolate what laity do and ministry what clergy do? So that question kept coming up. Let's see what the council had to do with helping to answer that one. Oh, I'm having problems with my computer, pardon. During the council, the documents and the bishops most frequently spoke about the concept of lay apostolate, not lay ecclesial ministry. Yet the Constitution, the dogmatic Constitution on the Church, also states that all have a role to play and are called to make their own contribution to the growth and sanctification of the Church. It was during the council, though, that when they tried to understand the role of the laity, that we realized they're mentioned in many documents in the Church. So we need to be careful to look at all the documents and not just the document of the laity on the laity itself. The council uses the term ministry in multiple documents when referring to laity. And here are just a number of examples I found with the help of Cardinal Dudley, who had been a mentor for me as a student. The Pastoral Constitution on the Church uses the term ministerium rather loosely to indicate any kind of service, including work on behalf of peace, justice, and the defense of human life. The dogmatic Constitution on the Church states that the faithful in virtue of their royal priesthood join in the offering of the Eucharist. They likewise exercise that priesthood in receiving the sacraments, in prayer and thanksgiving, in the witness of a holy life, and by self-denial and act of charity. The document on the sacred liturgy speaks of servers, lectors, commentators, and choir members as performing a true ministry. The Declaration on Christian Education, which very much guides everything that we do in our secretariat, speaks of religious instruction carried out by laypersons as a true ministry. And finally, the decree on mission activity of the Church speaks of ministry of those who, without ordination, perform works proper to deacons, such as teaching catechism, presiding over communities in the name of the pastor, or practicing charity in social or relief work. So in review, before Vatican II, the focus was on laity sharing in the apostolate of the clergy, bishops, priests, and deacons. The focus was on Catholic action and then developed into lay apostolate. Laity began to be seen as having an apostolate of their own. The Second Vatican Council emphasizes that all are called to holiness and begin to use the term ministry for things that laity do. So it's after the Council, though, that official documents show a growing tendency to apply the term ministry to lay activities. As an example, Blessed Paul VI begins a clear shift from focus on lay apostolate to the language of lay ministry. Let's look at some examples. In his encyclical on the letter on evangelization in the modern world, which we're still learning how to implement in our time, he writes, the Church recognizes the place of non-ordained ministries of laity, which are able to offer a particular service in the Church at the service of the Word for the sake of evangelization. Let's see, I lost my place here. All right. So Pope John Paul II continued to reflect on how to fully implement the Vatican Council. He called upon bishops in each country to reflect on how they would do so in their own settings. So how did this develop in the U.S.? What did it look like? Let's look at how our bishops responded to these documents and these statements of popes and developed guidance for them. After the Council in November 1980, actually at each of their major meetings over the years, they began to talk about how would we respond. So in 1980, the full body of bishops issued Called and Gifted, the American Catholic Laity. This summarized the reflections of the bishops commemorating the 15th anniversary of the issuance of the Vatican II decree on the apostolate on the laity. In 1982, the Bishops' Conference mandated and established a USCCB commission on accreditation and certification. That commission actually helped to serve for a number of years, helped both dioceses and national organizations develop standards for lay leaders. In 1983, the Code of Canon Law addresses circumstances in which lay people may minister in leadership roles within the Church. That canon law also further emphasized that persons who devote themselves permanently or temporarily to some special service of the Church are obliged to require appropriate formation, which is required to fulfill their function properly and carry it out diligently, zealously, and conscientiously. After the Council, Pope John Paul II commemorated the Council's promotion of the laity and the 20th anniversary of the decree on the apostolate by calling for a synod of bishops. He followed that synod with an encyclical on the vocation and mission of the lay faithful of the Church, in the Church and the world. This document strongly opposed a focus of either lay or laity or leaders. The focus really was strongly supported that both laity and clergy can have leadership roles in the Church. In 1992, the same Pope issued a document on seminary formation, Pastoris Dabovobis, or I will give you shepherds. He proposed 4 aspects for formation that seminarians should have, but also that he felt all Christ's disciples should embody in their lives and ministry. These 4 aspects are human, spiritual, intellectual and theological, and pastoral. And for each of them, very specific guides were developed. In 1993, the U.S. bishops decided to create an independent commission, the Commission on Certification and Accreditation, to expand its work to review certification standards and procedures for formation of laity, in particular leadership roles, such as a DRE, a youth minister, and a campus minister. In 2000, at the close of the Great Jubilee, and I'll be honest, this slide somehow is out of order, and I can't remember how I did that. But in addition, but John Paul said, in addition to the ordained ministries, other ministries, whether formally instituted or simply recognized, can flourish for the good of the whole community, from catechesis to liturgy, from education of the young to the widest array of charitable works. So even towards the end of his papacy, he knew the importance of this development. To come back to the U.S., in 1995, the full body of bishops issued Called and Gifted for the Third Millennium. This document actually was on the 30th anniversary of the document on the laity. And there, the bishops updated their understanding of the role of the laity of the Church in the U.S. Then the Commission on Accreditation and Certification began to accredit diocesan ministry formation programs in 1995, and for nearly 30 years helped the diocesan organizations to develop those standards and procedures for very specific roles. There was such a growth, however, in lay involvement that some tensions seemed to grow between priestly and lay ministry as priests tried to understand what their role was and laity tried to understand their role. So in 1997, the response to the growing misunderstanding and tensions, Pope John Paul wrote a document called Some Questions Concerning the Collaboration of Non-Ordained Faithful in Priest-Sacred Ministry. He emphasizes that terminology is important because this became a matter of controversy. He wanted to be sure that there were clear understandings about the boundaries in the collaboration of clergy and laity. So this document forbid lay persons to assume such titles as pastor and chaplain, but not excluding a discriminating use of the term minister. The late Cardinal Dudley warned about two misinterpretations in response to this document of Pope John Paul. He said some tend to go beyond this instruction, contending that the terms minister and ministry should be reserved to the ordained and never applied to laypersons. Others, he said, object to the term ministry being restricted to the exercise of an established office in the Church. But he wisely pointed out that neither of these positions seems to be warranted by official Catholic teaching, still less by Scripture and tradition. So the bishop, in response, formed a subcommittee on Lay Ecclesial Ministry, or Lay Ministry, in 1998 that published Together in God's Service Towards the Theology of Ecclesial Lay Ministry. Then in 1999, released Lay Ecclesial Ministry, The State of the Questions. Now, during these years, as these documents were written, the Cardinal Dulles and Cardinal George pointed out two opposite excesses that can arise. Laicism so emphasized baptism as to imagine that it confers all rights and powers in the Church so that ordination would not be understood as giving any new sacramental or hierarchical powers. But clericalism, or more appropriately, the clericalist deviation, as they both called it, overemphasizes the value of ordination, with the result that the active powers conferred by baptism, confirmation and Eucharist, and matrimony are unduly minimalized. Each of these errors survives to some extent and could be documented in current Catholic literature. The Second Vatican Council, he noted, showed a path between these two extremes that we need to pay close attention to. After the Council, the bishops issued this document. Actually, it was in November 2005, After a good 10 years of conversations, that the bishops issued Co-workers in the Vineyard of the Lord, the document we spoke about earlier, this resource for guiding the development of Lay Ecclesial Ministry. This was the fruit of 10 years of reflections and conversation, discerning this new development of emerging lay leaders, offering their gifts for the service of the church. While on the one hand, some might say we have a vocation crisis, and we do. This Lay Ecclesial Ministry, as it is called, is a sign of an abundance of vocations, and we need further discernment about the meaning of it for us all. So during the debate about co-workers in the Vineyard of the Lord, Cardinal Dulles clarified that if you want to understand the difference between ministry and apostolate, ministry is used for services intended to build up the church from within, whereas apostolate connotes activities directed to the world. In 2012, the bishops formed the Subcommittee on Certification for Lay Ecclesial Ministry and Service, and this was given a home as the Subcommittee of the Doctrine on Catholic Education. And the development of this actually came about while the bishops started to study and figure out how to better align all the work done in the conference with the goals of the conference for the country. And so a decision was made to see what was the role of this former independent commission. And so the decision was made to ask that commission to dissolve so that the work of focus on standards for leaders could come back directly into the work of the conference. So this subcommittee has representation from 5 of the bishops' conference committees to emphasize its importance and to bring the perspective of more committees into this ongoing dialogue. The chair comes from Catholic education, but there's someone from cultural diversity, clergy and consecrated life, evangelization and catechesis, and laity, marriage, family life, and youth. Soon, there'll be a 6th committee added, the Committee on Communications, because it's became more clear to the conference that we need to help better communicate the work that this committee does. The subcommittee was mandated by the conference to focus on the role of approving standards and procedures for certification of ecclesial ministers in both institutional settings, such as a prison or a hospital or a campus, and in parish settings, such as in the case of a parish DRE, a youth minister, or a pastoral associate. We no longer accredit, but we do offer consultation to diocesan and academic formation programs to be sure that they align those programs with the standards that were approved by the conference, so that people can be best prepared to do the roles that they feel called to serve in. What are some benefits to the local church that come from this? Well, now bishops and their staff can offer support to parishes by identifying competent candidates, testifying to their appropriate formation, promoting ongoing and focused formation, and responding to continuing formation needs. Here are some benefits to the local church that were recently recorded by a pastor and a bishop, so that we can see just how this certification is helpful for us.
Not so much passing a course, it is actually taking the call that you believe you have to serve and then using all of your gifts and talents to learn how to use that call
Okay. So you can see now, if we look over, do a brief review, after Vatican II, the focus changed. The focus was on ministry, or the emergence of lay leaders who began to be seen as having ministries to build up the church in addition to their own apostolate. There was an explosion of these ministries. Warnings were issued to address concerns about misunderstanding the relationship of clergy and lay ecclesial ministries and the difference between these ministries and the lay apostolate. The U.S. bishops responded to this development in creating first an independent commission and then a subcommittee to address this growth by developing standards and procedures for formation, certification, and recognition. And now, Pope Francis challenges us to look at all our efforts in light of the lens of missionary discipleship. He tells us to realize that perhaps the relationship of clergy and lay ministers needs to be transformed so that together we can more effectively transform both church and society. And now, missionary disciples, what do they need? Pastors and leaders who assist in caring for them, to build them up from within by calling them forth, forming them, and supporting them on their journey of faith. They also need people like these new leaders, perhaps these lay ecclesial ministers that have been raised up by the Holy Spirit to assist us and nourish us, all for the many new activities we're called to perform for the transformation of the world. That is why I particularly was so encouraged by the prayer intentions of Pope Francis for this month of November. All who join him are praying for the collaboration of laity and priests so desired by the Council and even the popes before the Council. So as persons who have probably benefited from the work Lay Ecclesial Ministries do, what do you think? What more would you like to know? Here's where I'd like to hear some questions from those who are participating. So, one question, what are some good questions, good steps an interested person can take if they want to be a lay ecclesial minister? Well, for one, it would be good to talk to someone who is in lay ecclesial ministry already, perhaps some of the roles, people in the roles we talked about earlier. The other would be to look and see what programs are available in the diocese in which you reside. We work frequently with diocesan directors to evaluate what's going on in the diocese that can help support. In some dioceses, for example, such as the Diocese of Detroit, the seminary there, Sacred Heart Seminary, offers formation for lay ecclesial ministers. But the first step is really to pray and to discern, if I feel this call, what is the specific role that I may feel called to? And the best thing, the good thing to do, again, is to dialogue with someone. All right. Let's see. I'm looking to see if there are other questions here. All right. So far, so good. Is there any other questions you would have? Further questions about things you could do to discern your role, your call to this? I would like to note that I've had the honor of noticing that a number of people who originally felt called to lay ecclesial ministry also eventually saw calls to found within that call a call to consecrated life, and some even to priesthood. So, would Christian service coordinators be included in lay ecclesial ministry? At this point, no. However, there is one diocese that does actually take them all the way through a certification process. Let's see. Some good scriptures to reflect on in this discernment process. I think that there are really any of the really listening to any of the scriptures and looking at the calls of the disciples and looking at the calls of the prophets, the calls throughout the Old and New Testament could teach you a lot, because often you'll find, just like we resist, they resisted the call initially. One person asked, how do I see the new Department of Labor laws affecting lay ecclesial ministry? That's something we're still discovering. We're looking at that. It's affecting not only those in the church, but in all the nonprofit world. That's going to take us some time to uncover. Let's see. Well, it's this development in the church is an exciting one, and we've approached it very cautiously. And I have to say, you'll notice, if you look back at the history we went through, which I realize I went through rather quickly, you'll see just how much the bishops have reflected on this and are still discerning what's the best way to tap this talent that's been coming forward. Someone says, I already know what I want to do, but I've had trouble gaining cooperative engagement with the churches and the archdiocese. Can you please recommend where I can make a formal application to begin work? Well, actually, the very first place to look would be to talk to a pastor, or to talk to one of the places, was specifically to talk to your pastor, because your pastor would know what the needs are in the particular parish you serve. It's at the archdiocesan level, really they become involved more in the formation of a lay ecclesial minister, but it's where most serve is directly in the role of a parish. So it's good to speak to a pastor, your pastor, as well as to anyone who may be in that role. And most parishes actually advertise positions, usually either on diocesan sites, and so some of the national organizations that serve lay ecclesial ministers, such as the National Conference for Catechetical Leaders, the National Association for Lay Ministry. Each of these different professional associations have websites where their members learn about positions that are available, and they encourage them to participate. Using the term lay, the pastor may have been non-responsive. This may be because I've used the wrong term. That may be true. And the thing is really to speak about what is the specific role you feel called to help in. So if you feel called to help in religious education, that role is a parish catechetical leader. If you feel called to help with youth, that role would be a youth minister. There are different things pastoral associates do. Some of them are most of them help the pastor wherever the greatest need is, but one of them would be also social concerns, helping in the and most recently there have been interest in even healthcare. So there are now parish nurses in some places. So there is no certification for those at this time. All right. If you run, someone said it's possible that you could run into issues, and should they go to the parish council? That is not a good thing to do, because as a matter of fact, then you're setting up the parish council versus the pastor. The best thing, really, if you're not having, if you want to help and the pastor doesn't see you in that role, then you really need to discern, is that the right call for you? Or is it perhaps not in this community where you're being called to serve? I would advise speaking to really getting spiritual direction to address that individually to see if you may better discern where this call is leading you. But to go to a parish council really is to really try to bypass the pastor, which is never a good thing to do. If he is responsible, and the council is responsible for advising him, not controlling him. Are there other questions? Well, thank you. I hope that was helpful. For additional information on the webinar, you can go to the website that's now in the chat box. I would add that you can also go to the USCCB website and search the word certification, and you'll find all the pages connected to what my office does. Again, I want to thank you for this opportunity to share with you a little about who a lay ecclesial minister is, what it is, and I'm hoping some of you consider it because we do need more help. And as we all become more aware of our role to be missionary disciples, we know that all of us need the support of those who will help us better understand our faith, who will help us better to live our faith, and who will help us better to act on our faith in transforming the world. Thank you.
Thank you again, Dr. Harry Dudley, for presenting, and thank you to everyone who tuned in and joined us today. We'll have a recording of this webinar uploaded to our YouTube channel in the next week, so keep an eye out there and on our website, CatholicApostolatecenter.org, for the link. You're welcome to share it with anyone you'd like. As always, all of our content is free to share. If you haven't yet found us on social media, please like and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram in the hope that we'll continue to reach more people with spreading the message of the gospel. In the words of our patron saint, St. Vincent Pallotti, may the charity of Christ urge you on. Have a good day, and God bless.